Hey everybody, welcome to Retail Redux. I'm Cory Zelnik, along with my guest today, Jason Richter, and we're going to spend some time talking about the retail landscape as usual, but we're going to expand into the national markets with Jason today. Let me give you a little color on Jason. Jason is a friend of mine now for about 5-6 years. We've been spending a lot of time together talking about the business, and what appealed to me about having Jay on set today is his rich history in this business. So let me talk about his bio, and then we'll dig into some things. Okay, Jason has been on the landlord side. Jason is been on the tenant side, and that makes him part of a small fraternity. I don't even know if we're big enough to call ourselves a fraternity, right?
For sure.
Right? Who have been the tenant and have been on the landlord side, and brought that experience to our world. Jason has spent time with Thor Equities on the landlord side. Jason has been, as I said, the tenant. He has been Perfumania. He has been Jimmy Jazz and Company. So he's done a lot of work in all aspects of the retail landscape. And that's why, to me, he makes an exceptional guest for our show.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Currently, Jason's roster of business in his organization, I should say, Capricorn Retail Advisors. I failed to mention that. Jason is a managing principal and co-founder of that organization, and today and for the last 5 or 6 years or so now, have been doing tenant rep on a national basis. They do some local, but they've expanded greatly in the national arena. Some of the tenants include, I'm gonna go to my cheat sheet, Bally, Loeffler Randall, Outdoor Voices, Fred Siegel, Stio, Catbird, Studio Pilates, Bella K, Sarah Flynn, Monica Rich Cassan, Le Petit Maison, Ushamama, I hope I pronounced that one right. Washma. New West Knife Works, Dirty Taco, Valiant Paris, and a whole slew of others. Those are just some of the ones that jump out at me. And I wanted to talk to you today about the retail landscape nationally. A lot of these guys that you have been working with, you've been advising throughout the country. We often spend time here talking about New York primarily, and my world is a little bit more food service oriented, QSR oriented, but your resume today speaks about pure retail, the apparel and the like. So I give you the floor to tell me about you and some of the people that you're repping and how you see the street today.
I appreciate you having me today, Cory, and especially getting to know you as well as I have over the last 5-6 years. And love that you're doing this podcast. I definitely think this is the spirit of retail today, is making sure that you're connecting with your audience, and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about your social media endeavors as well.
Absolutely.
So as you mentioned, I have sat on the landlord side, the tenant side, and now the brokerage and the advisory side. And I think, like yourself, who's also been in those shoes, we share a perspective that is truly unique, and we try to advise our clients as such. So Capricorn Retail Advisors, as you mentioned, we do a fair amount of both landlord and tenant work. Our business is bifurcated. We do landlord work here mostly in New York, but also a lot of projects throughout the country. And then on the tenant side, we have built a business that I think is somewhat multidisciplinary between digitally native brands, so digital first e-com brands that have decided to go into omnichannel and build a bricks and mortar location, and also have some degree of food and beverage. You mentioned Le Petit Maison, LPM, but we work with these international and national brands that are not ubiquitous. I think that's probably been our niche, and many of them are mission driven. It's important that they have some sort of positive impact on their neighborhoods, communities, and the retail landscape. So each one of the brands that you've run through, more or less, is very specialized, and we found that as we look through the streets and the malls, the landlords look to us to bring something that's very different and again, unique to their merchandising mix.
And let me ask you, you talked about digitally native. Some of these brands, quite frankly, I hadn't been familiar with until I got to know you and followed what you're doing with them. Is there a percentage of who you're working with that were digitally native and you brought to bricks and mortar, or just a combination here or there?
On the tenant side, I would say we're probably 30-40% in that digitally native brand ecosystem. Part of the impetus for that was 20 plus years ago, before I got into real estate. Fresh out of school, I actually developed an e-commerce company that very much resembles what Shopify is today, and I sold that before getting into real estate. So that was my foray into retail. I was in tech, and then ended up going into real estate, getting a job working for Thor Equities.
You need to sneak that into the bio somewhere. That shouldn't be lost. That's a good point.
Thank you. So, and really happened upon that job at Thor through Monster.com at the time, interviewing with my now partner Andrew Shulman, who hired me for my first job. But we definitely have watched the tech landscape evolve. Over the last 6 years, 7 years, one of the drivers, not the only driver, but one of the drivers for these e-commerce brands growing in the bricks and mortar channel is the increasing cost to acquire customers socially, digitally, and electronically. So naturally, bricks and mortar has become, again, that customer acquisition vehicle, and in many respects more economical, depending on, again, the streets and
yeah, and that's something that I hear on a regular basis. Not involved as much as you are in terms of the omni-channel retailers per se, but anecdotally and statistically, they talk about the customer acquisition. I keep hearing it over and over again.
The name of the game,
right? And how bricks, the value of bricks, are so great in terms of how much the retailer actually saves by having that presence, as compared to what it costs to, I always say to people when I'm talking, when you make that comment about the cost of customer acquisition, and I can't get too specific, but I describe it broadly and say, when you ordered 5 pair of pants from the Gap, and then you sent back 3, and then they sent back 2 to replace the 3 you sent back, and so on and so forth, the margins just go from here to here to here, right? And so what they realize now, and you do this daily, is that you just need a small box on the street, let them come in, and then pick out the 3 pair of pants that they exactly want, and then we'll ship it to you.
The margin in retail, especially when it's direct, in bricks and mortar, is probably the greatest, and of course rent eats into that margin, but not to the same extent as both. When I'm saying customer acquisition, it's both what you're talking about on a net basis, but it's also how much to buy that customer, how much to have something on social click in front of them for them to then buy, or a coupon of some sort to incentivize a customer to buy. So as they're doing that and looking at demographics and lookalike demographics on Facebook and Instagram, and paying per click and per ad, if you look at the retail landscape, you could start to talk about impressions and footfall almost in the same light.
Right.
And the other thing, omni-channel that's very different is sales aren't just on a net income for the store or what we'll call a 4-wall basis. You then start to look at the halo effect, and really, you and I think one of the words that stands out in my mind when you and I speak over the last 5-6 years is accretive. That's what this whole omni-channel business is about, is can you be accretive to online and add it so it's 1 + 1 = 3, and that halo effect, which I think ICSC has reported statistically 28 to 35% will lift, this digital lift in a market when you open a store. How does that all work together? And when we're, let's say, advising and to some extent mentoring some of these brands into the real estate space, we're also talking about communication with the customer in a way that doesn't translate in the digital space as much. So when you go into a store and you have an aesthetic and you have something that's tactile and you have sales folks that are interacting with your customer, you can do things in real life, so to speak, that you can't do online. And that's just another layer to what bricks and mortar offers, in addition to buy online, pick up in store. And I don't know about you, and perhaps in my older age, I don't want to just keep sending stuff back and forth. Like, I want to go into the store and either touch it before I buy it, but I also want to, if I'm returning it, I want to sort out my options right there.
Right. Well, don't age yourself so fast. You're not that old, but I hear you loud and clear. And just speaking about social, digital social I think we all started, being in the business that we are in probably 10, 12 years ago when the internet was going to take over retail. If it's that far back, maybe it's 10 years ago exactly. And everybody panicked because that's what became the statement du jour. And I think that it maxed out at about maybe 9 or 10%, excuse me, of all retail sales came off the internet. So it wasn't as bad or as dramatic as anybody really thought it was. People just followed the media and ran along with it. And so I think people are understanding that retail is not dead and it's gonna live on. But a statistic that I heard recently that really blew my mind was that in 2022 there were $695 billion in sales via social media alone. Now, obviously, it's digital as well, but social media as a little bit of a differentiator compared to internet. And I was also told that that's going to double by 2025. Okay, so that's 1.3 trillion. It's unbelievable.
It really is.
So that whole connectivity of social media and retail just continues to evolve.
And I think it's going to get even crazier when you start to layer in some of the kind of VR and AI integrations.
Right.
I don't think we've even scratched the surface, but to your point, click through on social is growing. The gaming world, which has all sorts of, I'm not sure how much you followed, and candidly, this is more nascent for me too, but all of the major brands getting involved in the gaming industry, selling, virtual sneakers and apparel and accessories within that space. So
yeah, I heard a thing at some point, and maybe it's still true, and I don't know how it works, that you can order Chipotle while playing Roblox. To somewhere, and I still have no clue. I have a wonderful 11-year-old stepson. I'm waiting for him to tell me how to do
it. I'm with you. It's going to be one of the most significant shifts, I think, over the next 10 years in the way that we kind of live, work, and play relative and to shopping. What we've seen thus far is just really the beginning, and that growth doesn't astound me, even though it is astounding.
Yeah.
I think we're in for a very interesting wild ride.
Yeah, no, I think that's all true, and we're going to hear and live new statistics on a daily basis. There's going to be new technologies on a daily basis, but what you find is that when you circle back, people like to feel in touch. There's still a large segment of feel in touch. I know that a lot of this technology feeds into the Gen Z mentality, maybe the bottom percentage of the millennials that like it, but I think that there's still plenty of feel in touch, and I know that there's, right, and there's always going to be the non-internet, non-social media related retail components of the world, right? Maybe you can order your cannabis online, but you still may have to go get it somewhere.
Yeah.
You need to go to CityMD. You need to go to the grocery store if you want to get your groceries. I know they deliver. I know they have drop-offs in the parking lot, but you want to go there. You want to go to the gym.
Human beings are social creatures, and I don't think that's going to be lost from our DNA in our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes. And yeah, I think you can get almost anything, including medical attention via the internet or online these days, but people feel more comfortable, at least currently, with someone in person. I love to cook, so yes, I could order everything via Whole Foods delivery or otherwise, or on Amazon, which is the same, but I want to go and pick out. I want to see what looks good. I want to maybe even smell the vegetables, and I think that's the difference. And even with clothing, I don't want to order 50 of everything and see what fits and works. I want to go to the store. I want to touch and feel tactile shopping and see what quality is and see what looks good in person. My computer screens, wasn't off or anything. So I think that's going to be around for a while, but I do acknowledge this virtual piece will probably make it a bit more comfortable to do all of these things from anywhere as we move forward. but under all circumstances, I still agree with you that human beings, we want to be nurtured with social activity. We want to be out and about. We want to feel the fresh air.
Yep.
Like you can do a virtual skiing, snowboarding simulator,
Right.
but there's nothing like being on that mountain.
That's for sure. That's for sure. And so going just now. So now we took care of our virtual and our social. Just let's go back to the bricks. Right. You're doing a lot of this work around the country with the various brands. What are you seeing out there? In New York, the layman walks the street and says, "Oh, there's all these vacancies." The person in the business, myself, yourself, say, "We know they're starting to get filled." There's always going to be a certain segment of the physical landscape that's vacant. It's just part of the existence. There's always going to be a secondary or a tertiary market that in good times doesn't get filled. But we know that a lot of the pockets within the city are starting to fill up nicely. Tell me more and talk about more nationally and broadly what you're seeing. And before I hand you the ball, I've been hearing that development has slowed down because the cost of development throughout the country.
For sure.
And so that's creating a tremendous squeeze on supply for retailers to grow, which means the supply, demand, economics 101. And then there's also the stories that this is the first year that there are more store openings versus store closings. So just, talk to me about what you're seeing in the world.
Yeah, for sure. So you're spot on construction costs, and it's a good thing because retail in the US specifically has outpaced retail development anywhere globally. I think we're quoting something like at least double the retail square feet per capita here than anywhere. I think the last I checked it was 26, 28 versus Canada that was at half, and Europe might even been half of that. So I think contraction would be a good thing here, but I will tell you this, the better markets throughout the country are doing gangbusters.
Right.
And it varies by category. Luxury has been on fire more broadly. Over the last few years, you started to see a lot more brands coming into the space that were perhaps just a flagship here or there, whether it was one in a country or two, but you'd go into a center in the luxury space, while they typically would have a Louis and a Gucci, now you start to see the Balenciagas and even Hermes doing more deals. If you start to look at what has happened from a COVID perspective, so migration out of New York and LA during 2020 and to some extent 21, widely known, widely talked about, to states like Florida and Texas and maybe even Arizona, whether it was for economic reasons, political reasons, quality of life reasons, costs. So that has definitely lifted those markets significantly, and you've seen tremendous velocity in South Florida. You've seen tremendous velocity in Dallas, Houston, Austin, and to some extent, again, many other states. And then even the smaller, cooler burgeoning markets like the Austins, the Nashvilles, the Charlottes of the world, all have been on fire. And I don't want to say 100% you're seeing the opposite in New York and LA and San Francisco, because you and I both know, you walk around Soho right now, it's on fire.
Right.
We've seen tremendous leasing on Madison, etc. But those markets, the demand has been incredible, and the amount of brands, both legacy retailers and newer entrants to the market, is out there and seemingly unlimited. And what I would say one of the biggest challenges is when a brand says, okay, this is, especially some of the smaller brands, say, hey, I want to go and open up a handful of stores throughout the country, and there are obvious choices in each market on where they should go. And certainly not every market has a one-stop shop of a location. It depends on the brand. Is it a street brand? Is it a mall brand? Is it more of a project? Is it edgier? Is it luxury? Like, we obviously want to tailor the real estate that we're recommending.
And this is why they hire you to figure those things out, right?
Of course. So that may, studying their e-commerce, getting a look at their demographics, seeing where we can find lookalike markets, because sometimes they've focused their customer acquisition online and it tells one story, but there are that same customer exists in other places that they just haven't focused. So we share that with them, share this momentum. So as an example, I remember, and not to be too off topic, but I remember COVID was it was in the heights of it in 2020. We started to see what was happening with companies moving out of LA to Florida, New York to Florida, people leaving to go to Florida. First thing we did was recommend to certain restaurant clients who were active, instead of going to the West Coast right now, we think you should focus on Miami. We see this crazy momentum happening in Miami, and we were ahead of that by many months, and 3-4 months later, Major Food Group had signed 5 deals down there,
Right.
and we saw that coming. But there are the markets throughout the country, I think, that have really just been on fire are the ones I mentioned, and I think just the gravitas to some smaller, cooler areas where people, I think, left the city and said, I'm gonna set up shop in Bend, Oregon, or I'm gonna end up moving to Boise.
And we had talked prior to the show. You had used an analogy in our discussion about looking at what a Williamsburg is to the New York City market broadly, not just Brooklyn, but to the New York City market, and using that as a basis of comparison in some of these other states.
Yeah, so when you have some of these, let's just say, cooler, hipper retailers, and they are looking for growth, and they're telling us, okay, well, we have great e-commerce in, say, Minneapolis, right? Which is a market that I think when you're in New York, you're probably not thinking a whole lot about. We'll end up saying, okay, you can look at something like the North Loop, which is the cooler, more Williamsburg part of the city, just outside of the city. And if we're doing that, it's probably a brand play. But note that you may be, if you do that, exchanging, top line rev and perhaps even in return bottom line to go and keep that brand imaging to go to that location. But if that's what's important on where you are in your growth, that would be the decision versus going to a wealthy suburb like Edina, or looking at a proven entity like the Galleria or Mall of America in that particular environment. But we do make those analogies quite often, and I think even whether it's our industry or the press, the Williamsburg of this city, this state, has been something that I feel like we've been hearing and of course adapted it in turn, or adopted it in turn. So, the Williamsburg of Miami, you're obviously talking about Wynwood. And if you're looking at the Williamsburg of LA, it's probably Silver Lake, or it could be Venice. But there are offerings within each major city that really check a lot of boxes depending on the type of retailer that you're working with. And it's always starting with, what is it that we're trying to solve for?
Right.
What is the objective here? Are we working on, again, building brand equity? Are we working for building top line revenue? And in exchange, we may have to go to some of these streets or malls that are obviously expensive,
Right.
but the sales are there. Are we looking for pure profitability? And is it a 1-store strategy? Is it a 5-store in the market, building operating efficiencies, and then kind of rolling it from that?
Years ago, just taking off from that a little bit, years ago when some of the big brands first hit Fifth Avenue or Madison Avenue or Soho here in New York, they would say, loss leader, it's a flagship. We just want to put our brand. We advertise in Vogue magazine, so we need to be on Fifth Avenue. And so that store is never going to make any money, but it's important for us to be there, and we put it in the marketing column in the Ledger and blah, blah, blah. And so I always got all that. What threw me was that they had the Fifth Avenue flagship, and then there was the Soho flagship, and then there was the meatpacking flagship, and it took a long while, quite frankly, for some of these retailers to catch up with themselves and realize this ain't a good way to make money.
No.
And so now, I forget the multiple flagships, but are people having that discussion where they want to put out a loss leader? I know every store can't possibly make money, but does loss leader even come up as a discussion? Does marketing come up as a discussion on any regular basis? I'm sorry.
No. Absolutely. And I say absolutely. It's not just, hey, should we do a flagship? Is this a discussion about making this a loss leader? Most times, if they're even going down that road, they honestly feel they're able to substantiate the rents with sales and think they're going to be able to at least break even. And at that point, it's a beautiful thing. And
Right.
if you can make money, even better. With the smaller brands, I think marketing would likely come into play more in the realm of a pop-up. Can we do a pop-up here for a certain amount of months, a pop-up there, which we go through all the pros and cons, because more times than not, the pop-up stores, and this is something I debate with folks about often, pop-ups don't make any net income more often than not on the four-wall basis. So they really are just to market. And even the question about whether you're learning and you can extrapolate the sales you did for a month to a year to see if that's a good market for you, I don't think that's even there. And we can have a whole show about pop-ups.
Yeah, right. But let me ask you, just to cut you a little bit, does some of that pop-up conversation come from social media, meaning they're tracking where the people are and they're following us, and so maybe we need to be in Oregon because we have such a following there, let them see and feel and touch us for 3 months or 6 months?
Absolutely. So social, whether it's interaction, whether it's followers or actual sales, definitely is a great, first party data is definitely a great indicator of perhaps where you should be. It's not always true, but it is something that we utilize and study and say, okay, we can do this and that. But what happens from there, once you say, let's build on this brand equity, is if we pop up, what are we going to learn? And again, back to what are the intentions? And I think you can't build a store with its best foot forward for a month's time. Like a full build out isn't going to happen. You're not going to have that CapEx budget for it. You're not going to necessarily hire the staff that you would for a permanent store in that respect. And what you learn, you might build a buzz. Like Glossier has done a great job. They've done these pop-ups for a few days, and there are lines out the door. Like, it's been incredible what they've done. And then in turn have opened up full price stores. But it wasn't, in my view, let's do this pop-up, see how it goes for a few days, and then we'll know. I just don't think there's enough data. So I look at that as really, to your point, yes, we have a customer, we have a following there. We want to build on that for sure. Or maybe it's even not about marketing, maybe it's about clearance. We've got so much inventory, I'm going to do a few days, I want to move this. But I think back to the original question about the flagships and the loss leaders, the main thing that I'm seeing, at least with these digitally native brands, is that, or omni-channel brands for that matter, not just digitally native, is the ability to say there's more than one P&L here to consider. There's more than just this bricks and mortar location involved in this conversation, and what is the net effect. So we help brands sometimes in an advisory capacity, consulting, building pro formas, and you start off with your four-wall pro forma.
Right.
But then from there, I think a savvy retailer is also layering on lifetime value and customer acquisition, and saying, what is it that this ultimately means, and how is it accretive? So I think that's another layer where you could look less to the bottom line, but we never, as former retailers, we never advocate for that. We always try and make recommendations for locations to be standalone, profitable over time, of course, because sometimes it takes a year or so to mature, for that business to gear up, for people to know you're there, etc. But we always advocate for full-blown profitability over the term of the lease. Very, very rarely have we had the person or the client that says, let's go and blow it out of the water.
Well, and that's great. I mean, I think that's great for our business in general as we monitor it, because like I said, when you look back to those early brands that just said, hey, we're going to put it out there, and I think that's a credit to the retailers as well. Having advisors like yourself, certainly beneficial to them. It's also them smartening up a little bit and seeing what's going on. It took them a while, but they
took their lashes.
Right. Most of them have figured it out at great cost, but they have figured it out nonetheless and are going forward. A couple of quick things as we sort of close out the discussion. One, you hit the nail on the head with all the things that I wanted to touch on, so I appreciate that greatly. I also wanted to step back a little bit and compliment you and Capricorn for all the things that you're doing with respect to social media. I know you want to talk about it with me and whatever, but I think that we are aligned as operators in this business and seeing the strength and the power of social media and how it is positively affecting our business, yours and mine, collectively. So kudos to you guys for what you're doing, and
following your lead, my man.
Yeah, thank you. And I love watching the stuff, and I think that's great. And I think that there's tremendous upshot for Capricorn and for Zelnik, and I look forward to our opportunities to collaborate on things, which I think will come in short order, and I look forward to that greatly.
I do as well.
And I want to, before I completely thank you for your time, I do want to mention the part of your bio that I did not mention earlier, and I apologize for that, but I'm going to close with it. The most important part of your bio is that you and your lovely wife and daughter live on Long Island here in New York, and that's the biggest and most important thing out there for you, and I know that as a family man, so I did not want to neglect saying that.
I greatly appreciate it. I'm sure Lindsay and Lottie would, and it's truly the best job I've ever had. So.
Excellent, excellent. I'm so glad to hear that. And again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I look forward to doing this again in short order, and maybe we'll toast a few deals that we'll do together down the road.
Amen, my man. Thank you so much, Howard. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, Jason. And folks, thank you again for spending time with us on Retail Redux. It was great having Jason Richter from Capricorn Retail Advisors along for the ride, and we look forward to catching up with you next time. Thank you so much.